Good afternoon, this is Clark Neighbors with BIS Commodities with the market recap for the week ending September 7th, 2018. As far as the grain is concerned, very quiet week. Pre-harvest activity not really in full force yet based on the weather. Lots of rain in especially the upper parts of the Midwest this upcoming weekend. Balance the Midwest should see some substantial rains based off of the tropical storm marching through part of the southern and eastern Midwest, but weather looks good next week. We should start seeing some more harvest activity and some better knowledge of yields going forward. And with that in mind, keep in mind next Wednesday, the 12th, supply and demand update and also production update by the USDA. I think most of the trade are looking for corn number as far as yield slightly smaller than August on average. Keep in mind the trend is usually for those crop numbers to get better on recent history and the bean yield to actually get a little larger. I think the beans are the ones that are going to be interesting to watch as we progress through harvest. Now through the week, again, I mentioned it's fairly quiet. Corn up 2 cents for the week. Beans basically a half a cent higher. The mover was the wheat market. Wheat was down 34 cents a week ago, meaning the trade thought there was going to be some upcoming U.S. wheat business, and there still could be based on the smaller crop in Eastern Europe and Russia putting on export limits on some of their products, but up to this point that has not happened, and some of that business has not come through. Thus, we've seen kind of pressure in the wheat market this week. Cash trade fairly limited as far as movement. We are continuing to see old crop move to town in anticipation of harvest, as you typically do this time of year. Corn, I think this week, again, quiet with about a 9-10 cent trading range. In beans, maybe 15 to 18 cent trading range this week, so fairly quiet. We'll see if we put some volatility in this market post the report, and as we progress through harvest. Basis levels continue to be extremely wide. Both on corn and beans. Corn not as much. Corn's more typical fall levels or harvest levels, if you would, especially compared to some of the deferred months. Beans on the other side, we're starting at record low basis levels. I mean, CIF market is at best option price as we go home tonight. In many areas in the country, bean basis is 75 to $1.25 under. I mean, those are numbers that are unheard of to some degree, and especially when you look at or near historical wide spreads out to the July, you get huge carries. So the amount of beans and the size of the bean crop and the carry out and so on, a lot of things to kind of shuffle through here, but the cash market is telling us this market is very soft going forward. Now obviously if the Chinese trade situation gets rectified and fairly quickly, that could help. You'd have a knee-jerk reaction, I'm sure, to the upside on the market and also the spreads, but you're still not going to put a big dent in that carryout, and that carryout's big, so I think that's something to keep in mind going forward. The other issue as you reach out into late winter, early spring, because of what we're visiting about, will be how big of a change in acres do we see going into next year. Could be fairly significant on acres going into corn. New crop export sales, both on corn and beans, are pretty good. Corn is probably in the top 5 in the last 15 or 20 years as far as the amount of corn on the books as of this date. Beans were above last year but below the 5-year average. Again, mainly based off of the situation in China. So going forward next week, and livestock fairly quiet except for the hog market, and the storyline there is, as we mentioned a week ago, the African swine flu in China could and may end up being a talking point as we go forward. The initial reaction to that obviously is supportive or positive the hogs, but negative soybean meal and feed grains from a feed substance into that part of the world. If that disease continues to spread, that could have some impact there. So that obviously is worth watching. The other part of China that's worth watching is the trade situation. See where that ends up. We do have that supply and demand and production report next week. That also will be big, and also it looks like the weather as a general looks good here over the next week, 10 days. So in many cases we should at least be in the early stages or close to seeing some harvest activities in many parts of the Midwest. If you have any questions on any of these markets, feel free to call us at BIS Commodities here in Cedar Rapids. Phone number is 800-373-2525, or catch us on the web at biscommodities.com. With that, we hope you all have a great weekend.